Hi, my name's John Smart, and I am going to share with you the top 3 patterns from past ways of working that you need to know. Babbage is a key influence in our ways of working. He was ahead of his time, which is why this quote is coming from Babbage. And this is without relearning the hard way. It seems that we keep on relearning the same things again and again and again, and there are learnings from the past that organizations absolutely should be applying today, but are not. So I'm going to share with you those learnings so that you don't have to relearn it the hard way. What has led to this is I have read more than 80 publications written between 1835 and around about 1920 as I've been doing research for the next book that I'm working on. I've been going deep into previous ways of working and the lessons that we have learned, because the reason we work the way we do today in organizations is because of the past and how we've worked in the past. And I think it is super important to understand the past in order for us to understand the present and the future. And it seems that John Maynard Keynes was of the same opinion. To quote John Maynard Keynes, we must study the present in the light of the past for the purposes of the future. It really helps to know where we've come from to understand why we work the way we do today. So this is from Carlota Perez from the book Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. Every 50 to 60 years since the first industrial revolution, we have repeating technology-led revolutions. We have the first industrial revolution, which was textiles, starting in 1771. We then have the age of steam and railways. We then have the age of steel and heavy engineering. We then have the age of oil and mass production. We then have the age of digital. There is a recession in the middle every single time because there is a bubble that bursts. There's overinvestment on the left. The bubble bursts, we have a depression, and then there is a new normal on the right. And there is management innovation with each of these technology-led revolutions. There is a new way of working. So for the first industrial revolution, we have factory systems for the first time ever. Prior to this, our work was mostly agricultural. We were mostly organized into families and villages, and it was mostly agriculture. Now, for the very first time ever, we have a factory, and this is Cromford Mills in Derbyshire. We have a factory with over 1,000 people working in this factory. Unfortunately, 75% of the 1,000 people working there were children, because at that time there were no laws about child labour. And we are now driven by the clock for the first time. Previously, we were driven by seasons, we were driven by sunlight. Now, for the first time ever, the bell rang or the whistle blew at 6 a.m. It blew again at 6 p.m. You had a 12-hour shift. And for the first time ever, we are now driven by the clock. We also have role-based specialities at scale for the first time ever. So in Cromford Mills in Derbyshire, which was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, we have around about 15 role-based specialities. The raw cotton would come in at the top. It would be cleaned, it would be straightened, and it would work its way down the factory, down to the machines at the bottom of the factory, which were heavy, where it would be turned into thread. Then in the age of steam and railways, the management innovation is middle management, because we have the long distance of the railroad meant you couldn't manage by walking around like you could in a textile mill. If you had a problem which was 200 miles away, it's not feasible to have a messenger, especially prior to the telegraph, to have a messenger ride on horseback all the way back to the head office in either somewhere in England or in the States, back to New York, to then say, boss, we need a decision to be made, and then ride all the way back on a horse. Clearly that's not feasible. So for the very first writing on the topic of middle management is Daniel McCallum, 1855, the New York and Erie Railroad. And the evolution in ways of working here was delegated autonomy and multidisciplinary teams because of the distance of the railroad. And that was ahead of its time. Then we have the rise of scientific management. So then we have Frederick Winslow Taylor and a bunch of other people as well, including Gant and Town and Halsey and the Gilbreths. We have a absolute Cambrian explosion of writing at this point as well. So there's very little writing prior to the 1880s. 1880s onwards, there's an explosion of writing. There's lots of writing around, in particular, scientific management, what became to be called scientific management. And this is all about data and a data feedback loop, however, in an autocratic manner. So time studies, which come from Taylor, again, extreme specialization down to the task level and timing the tasks and determining that a manager determining what's an acceptable day's work, how long each task should take, and that then influenced your pay. If you did less than the manager said you ought to do, you got less than your previous day's pay. If you did more, you would get a bonus. Motion studies, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth studied motion and removed the amount of human motion needed to accomplish tasks. And important point, the context here is repetitive mass production with physical labor in noisy, heavy industry. It's repetitive. The focus is absolutely on output. And one of the major incentives at the time was that in the States, the wages were high and there was pressure on prices. So prices were falling. And so there was a desire to produce more output more cheaply. And that was the primary incentive. Also, USA at that time wanted to outperform Britain, where the UK was the workshop of the world, the origin of the first two industrial revolutions. And this is the point where USA was successful in overtaking Britain in terms of leading on an industrial revolution. And the writing of the time was very intentional around leading in the world around industrial production. So scientific management, we have data, and then we have Fordism and the Toyota production system. So Henry Ford, and in particular Sorensen, who we're going to take a look at, they established mass production with a moving assembly line. And then Toyota production system evolved that further to not just mass production, but flow production. So not having a massive inventory of parts like Ford did, but rather building just in time, building the right product, more of a focus on respect for people as well with the Toyota production system and continuous improvement. And now we have agile and lean. Lean is just another word for the Toyota production system, coined by John Krafkic in the book The Machine That Changed the World. It was actually coined from his master's thesis at MIT. And then agile, agility, the new product development game, professors Takeuchi and Nonaka writing about companies in Japan and how they managed to reduce their time. For example, Xerox reducing the time to make a new photocopier by 2/3 because they had a multidisciplinary team, they had a clear goal to achieve, and they were empowered to go figure out how to do it. So today in the age of digital, we have both agile and lean. Agile for unique, unknowable work, lean for repetitive, knowable work, lean production. And in terms of how we work today, most organizations, we have role-based silos. Those role-based silos and specialization at scale comes from 1771. So we are still working where we have organizations that are still working in a traditional manner. That comes from more than 250 years ago. In 1855, we have the world's first org chart, the world's first organization chart, and the writing of the time is that the purpose for graphically displaying the org chart is so that you know who you are accountable to. And the reporting line was the ordering line. So the language at the time was superior and subordinate. So you know who your superior is and you know who your subordinates are. The language used in the first industrial revolution for manager, the name for a manager was an overlooker, literally overlooking the workers. And you can still see that language being used in the word supervisor, supervisor, super, superior, visor, looking. So language is important. Watch out for the term supervisor, and also org charts. The way they have evolved have been about order giving, and that's completely changed now, where we have multidisciplinary teams where you do not take your work from your boss, from your line manager, and your line manager should be spending much more time on personal development, career growth, helping to support you as a person. And then we have project management. So Henry Gantt worked with Taylor in the early 1900s. Gantt was Taylor's first apprentice and developed the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart was called the man day record, and the man day record was, have you shoveled enough coal into the boiler today? If you have, you can go home, and if you shovel even more, you'll get a bonus. If you haven't, keep on shoveling, or you're going to get a deduction in your pay. That's where the Gantt chart comes from. And as you will see, surprisingly, Gantt was, he wrote about respect for people, despite the fact that I think even today, we misapply Gantt charts in an autocratic dictatorial type manner. So most organizations are using ways of working from anything from 250 years ago to 100 years ago. So my top 3 relearnings from literature from 1771 to 1950, featuring unsung heroes. So I'm going to talk about people that I hope you haven't heard of on the whole. I'm not going to talk about Taylor. I'm not going to talk about Ono-san. I'm going to try to feature some unsung heroes from the past. And, and I've found this fascinating as I've been doing this research. My viewpoint is, if I find this interesting, then I'm sure some other people will find this interesting as well. Number 1 out of 3 is the importance of a data feedback loop. The first character unlocked is Daniel McCallum, and he was a leader in the second industrial revolution. He was the general superintendent of the New York and Erie Railroad. He was born in Scotland. He emigrated to the US when he was a child, and he made his way up to run the New York and Erie Railroad. He created the world's first org chart. He was ahead of his time, and I'm going to show you that org chart in a moment. It's a work of beauty. He innovated ways of working. This is in the 1855 annual report of the New York and Erie Railroad. And his superpower is disrupting the status quo, not accepting the status quo. Again, he was ahead of his time. So this is the world's first org chart. And at the bottom, you have the senior leaders, not at the top. You don't have the senior leaders at the top, you have the senior leaders at the bottom. And it looks like a plant. The senior leaders are like the bulb of the plant, nurturing the rest of the organization, nurturing the rest of the plant. I really like this picture. I love how it's kind of artistic. It's kind of floral. The leaders are at the bottom, and those lines going out, those represent the actual railroads. So let's take a closer look. In the annual report from 1855, McCallum articulated some principles. First of all, a clear set of responsibilities for people, and that was not the norm at the time. Delegated autonomy. As I said, middle management, you have delegated autonomy. Again, that was not the norm for the time. And he insisted on a fast feedback loop, and information to be obtained through a system of daily reports. This is the first writing around ways of working, both for middle management, also on the importance of data and a fast feedback loop. The reason was that there were problems would happen, like I said, 200 miles away. Without that information, you couldn't solve the impediments. Also, rather oddly, the long railroads were more inefficient than the short railroads. They were making less money, they were less profitable, they were more expensive, and it shouldn't have been, with economies of scale, it should have been the other way around. So McCallum was trying to figure out, why are the long railroads more expensive? And to solve this problem, officers should be in full possession of all information necessary to judge industry and efficiency, with a complete daily history of details in all their minutiae. The comparison of division accounts will show the officers who conduct their business with the greatest economy, and will have the effect of exciting an honourable spirit of emulation to excel. So I really like that last bit in particular, because what he is saying is he's gamifying the data, gamification, an honourable spirit of emulation to excel. Comparison, this is a great culture hack. It's something I've done in the past, where once a month we produced a one-pager. We stacked ranked each value stream or business unit by an improvement trend. So the most improved at the top, the least improved at the bottom. And it absolutely drove behavior, because it was transparent, and the people who are at the bottom didn't want everyone else to know that they were at the bottom, and they didn't want to be at the bottom. They had an incentive to improve. So again, this is significantly, Daniel McCallum is significantly ahead of his time around the request for data, and using that for comparison, and using it culturally as well. The next character unlocked is Professor Robert Thurston. And he was primarily active in the third industrial revolution, steel. He was the first professor of mechanical engineering at Stevens Institute of Technology. Claims to fame, oh my goodness, he taught Taylor and Gantt at the Stevens Institute of Technology. Now, it took me quite a lot of books and research to put the jigsaw pieces together. I didn't come across this in one book, in one piece of writing. But it's like I had this light bulb moment of, oh my God, Taylor went to the Stevens Institute of Technology and he studied mechanical engineering. Turns out Professor Thurston was running mechanical engineering at the time Taylor was there. It turns out that Gantt also went there and was also taught by Thurston. So they were both taught by Robert Thurston. And it is no coincidence that he was internationally known for treating mechanical engineering like a science, and with a focus on data and measurement. He was the first president of the American Society of Mechanical Engineering, and it was the American Society of Mechanical Engineering which led to the proliferation of publication, because people would get together, they would present papers, they would discuss the papers, and then it was published in the public domain. And this is right now, this is all freely available on the internet, thanks to the Internet Archive and Google Books. You can knock yourself out in terms of going and doing your own research on this and reading the discussions at ASME, which I found fascinating. And you can see a young Taylor, you can see him listening to other people talking about what became scientific management. You can see his discussions, you can see how it influenced his thought process. So, Professor Robert Thurston, this is the building he taught in, and this is the president's inaugural address at the American Society of Mechanical Engineering. So in his own words, the first step is the careful collection of facts and the patient study of all phenomena systematically and completely, such that their values and their mutual relations shall be most easily detected and quantitatively measured. This was 16th of February, 1880. So the pattern is a data feedback loop. And I believe that Professor Robert Thurston is the true founding father, the godfather of scientific management. I believe it's his teaching of Taylor and Gantt and other people heavily influenced them. Taylor had the fame because of the Eastern Rates case. It went to court, which was about a railway wanting to put their prices up. And it was a famous court case that gave Taylor publicity. It was then serialized in a magazine, and then he published his book. And that's what led to Taylor getting all of the publicity. But as is always the case, it wasn't about one individual. It's about a group of people together. Taylor absolutely took it to the next level with a stopwatch and a focus on like a minute focus on detail. So today, in terms of a data feedback loop, no surprise, our learning is these are the things to measure. We recommend measuring better, value, sooner, safer, happier. I believe it is so important that organizations measure these things. There are a balanced set of measures: quality, time to value, value, safety, and happiness. You have to have a balanced set of measures. If you don't have a balanced set of measures, then you'll have the law of unintended consequences, and organizations that do a bad job of reducing time to value, we see quality go down and we see happiness go down because it's working people harder, not smarter, not actually fixing impediments in the system of work. So it's super important to measure the data measures for how you work, not just what you're doing, but how you work. Better, sooner, safer, happier. Measure, visualize, and make transparent. These are two deliberately fuzzy screenshots because they're production screenshots. The one on the left is a one-pager that used to go to senior leaders on a regular basis, which was stacked ranked. That's the one I was talking about. The one on the right is an open access dashboard with over 100 measures. You can go down to team level. You can aggregate the data up, team of teams, team of teams, all the way up to a business division, all the way up to the company. And you can look at correlations. You can look at cumulative flow diagrams. You can look at quality measures, flow measures, safety measures, happiness measures. And not surprisingly, they are positively correlated as you would expect. So the pattern is a dedicated data focus on how measures. Number 2 out of 3 is continuous improvement. Again, this is a behavioral trait of organizations that have been successful in previous industrial revolutions. So the next character unlocked, this is Andrew Carnegie, and he was most active in the third industrial revolution. He's the founder of Carnegie Steel Company, which was sold to US Steel. His claims to fame: he learnt from Daniel McCallum. So Andrew Carnegie is also Scottish by birth, and he grew up in a one-bedroom house in Scotland. His father was made redundant because of the first industrial revolution. So his father used to do weaving in the one room upstairs. He was put out of work because of the factory that was built. And so then the entire family emigrated to USA, emigrated to the States. And Andrew Carnegie is, I think, the only person, I'm sure there are other people, but he's one of the very few people, the only person I know that has worked in each of the first 3 industrial revolutions. So aged 12, he started out in a textile mill. He then worked in steam and railways, where he became the general superintendent of another railroad. I think it was the Pennsylvania Railroad. And that's where he would have met McCallum. And because they were both general superintendents of 2 different railroads, then there was the US Civil War. And at that point, McCallum, who is older than Carnegie, was running the railroads for during the US Civil War, and McCallum was running a subset of the railroads reporting to Daniel McCallum. So light bulb moment for me as I figured this out. Oh my God, Carnegie, worked with Daniel McCallum. So McCallum was talking about data. He was talking about data feedback loops. He was talking about impediments and improvement using slightly different words. There's no coincidence here. And then Andrew Carnegie saw the demand for iron and steel because he was running the railroad. And he then set up an iron company, an iron and bridge company, which then became steel, as there was innovation from iron to steel. And for Andrew Carnegie, he became the richest person in USA. He is, in real terms, he is the second most wealthy person ever in USA after John D. Rockefeller. And he was born into poverty in a one-bedroom house in Scotland. His superpower, he gave 90% of his fortune away to charity because he had experienced poverty and because he benefited when he was younger from someone else who was giving money to charity. He benefited by getting free library books so he could educate himself. And so he gave nearly all of his fortune to establish libraries across the English-speaking world, across the planet. And testament to the commercial success, this is the first steelworks, his first steelworks, the Edgar Thomson Steelworks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it is still operating today. And that, I think, is a good acid test of a successful organization. It is still producing steel today. And this was one of the first steelworks in the States. Interesting, if I just go back, interesting little culture hack here. Edgar Thomson was the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, where Andrew Carnegie was the general superintendent. And now he ran a steel company. Edgar Thomson was his biggest customer. He was selling bridges and rails to Edgar Thomson, who was the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. What a good culture hack to call your factory after your most important client. Guaranteed business success. Carnegie hired a German scientist to find out what was going on in the blast furnace, significantly increased efficiency. Meanwhile, in the UK, nobody knew what the hell was going on in the furnace. Nobody bothered to take a look. Rule of thumb, it's always worked this way. We end up with iron, we end up with steel. We just carry on working the way we've worked. The US overtakes Britain. A new rolling mill design replaced the old rail mill, which was only 3 months old. Carnegie ordered a new rail mill, only 3 months old, to be torn down and rebuilt. Carnegie and his team innovated processes so the molten metal did not need to cool. Prior to that, you would have pig iron. You would have various stages where the metal would be heated, it would cool down, it would be heated, it would cool down. They got rid of all of that. But meanwhile, in Britain, they didn't. Vertical integration, Andrew Carnegie ended up buying the iron ore mines, the coal mines, the railroads, and the shipping. He owned production from the raw material all the way through to getting it into the hands of the customer. So he had a focus on end-to-end flow by owning all of the stages. And light bulb moment, the factory was designed and built by Alexander Holley, who was a co-founder of the American Society of Mechanical Engineering. Right, at this point, this now links everybody together, because this means that Andrew Carnegie, who had worked for Daniel McCallum during the Civil War, knew Daniel McCallum. He also now would know Professor Robert Thurston, because Professor Robert Thurston was the president of the ASME and a co-founder. So it's quite likely that if Carnegie was buddies with Alexander Holley and asked him to design a steel mill, it's quite likely he would also know Thurston, who was teaching mechanical engineering, was also a co-founder of ASME. And Thurston knows Taylor and Gant. So at this point, oh my God, Daniel McCallum, Andrew Carnegie, Thurston, Taylor, and Gant, they were associated. Whether I've got no idea whether they met, I've got no idea who spoke to who, but they all would have known each other. They all would have known each other, absolutely. So that was a real light bulb moment for me. By 1890, this was the largest and most profitable steel company in the world. Only 15 years after its creation, it was the largest and most profitable steel company in the world. And then he sold it to US Steel and became a billionaire. So the pattern here is continuous improvement. The next character unlocked, this is level 4. So we're in the 4th Industrial Revolution. This is Charles E. Sorensen. By the way, what I haven't mentioned is you can probably see the images are moving. This was before motion pictures, or certainly some of the earlier images were before motion pictures. So this is a use of generative AI to have a bit of movement in the picture. So Charles E. Sorensen, this is the 4th Industrial Revolution, oil and mass production. He was a principal at Ford Motor Company. His claims to fame, he was the originator of the moving assembly line. Sorensen, not Ford. He was the head of production at Ford. There were a whole bunch of people who claimed to be the number 2 to Henry Ford. Henry Ford didn't like job titles and he didn't like documentation. So there are about 6 people that all said that they were the deputy to Ford. So he was one of the 6 number 2s to Ford. And his superpower was translating sketches from Henry Ford. And according to his book, My 40 Years with Ford, this is what Sorensen wrote. The job of putting the car together was a simpler one than handling the materials that had to be brought to it. The idea occurred to me that assembly would be easier, simpler, faster, sooner, safer, happier, if we moved the chassis along, moving it past the parts rather than moving the parts to the chassis. One Sunday morning in 1910, we put the frame on skids, hitched a tow rope to the front, and pulled it along until the axles and wheels were on. Then we rolled the chassis along. We put together the first car that was ever built on a moving assembly line. And it was Sorensen who was the one pulling the rope. The time to build a Ford Model T went from 12.5 hours to 93 minutes. Ford doubled the day rate of most workers and reduced working hours. People said he was crazy at the time to double the day rate and reduce the working hours, but actually incredibly smart move because it meant that the workers could now afford to buy the product that they were making. And so we have the beginning of mass production. So the pattern here is continuous improvement. Today, this is what I see every single time with every single organization, without exception, that I talk to or work with. People are too busy pulling the cart with square wheels to have a conversation about the round wheels. Every single time, there are smart, intelligent people who know what needs to be done, who know how to improve, but there's no incentive. It's like the incentive is just to be busy, 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 busy. There is no room for continuous improvement. I think there is a pandemic of busyness. And so the pattern is to incentivize continuous improvement. It's easy to say, it's harder to do, but just get on and do it. So, you know, anyone in a leadership position, it's not just about the what. It's not just about being busy doing the doing. It also, there has to be a priority and a reward and an incentive to continuously improve how you do what you do. Otherwise, things just slow down. And then number 3 out of 3 is humanity and respect for people. So this is the next recurring theme across industrial revolutions. And we are back to the 3rd Industrial Revolution, and this time Henry Gant. And he was an efficiency consultant. Like I said, he worked with Taylor. He was Taylor's first apprentice. He was the creator of the Gantt chart. He was Frederick Taylor's assistant from 1887. And his superpower with his Gantt charts is predicting the future. And from his book, Organizing for Work, written in 1919, Gantt writes, "It is undoubtedly true that the efficiency methods have failed to produce what was expected of them. The reason seems to be we have, to a large extent, ignored the human factor and failed to take advantage of the ability and desire of the ordinary person to learn and improve his or her position. Moreover, these efficiency methods have been applied in a manner that was highly autocratic. This alone would be sufficient to condemn them." Oh my goodness. The deep irony that Henry Gantt, the creator of the Gantt chart, is saying that scientific management has been applied in an autocratic manner, which is sufficient to condemn it. This is deeply ironic, given how most organizations use Gantt charts, where you have a project manager who goes into a dark room, predicts the future at the point of having learnt the least, determines what work people are going to do without speaking to the people doing the work, issues the Gantt chart in an autocratic manner. That has been my lived experience of not good ways of working in my career, of what I have seen happen. So I find this deeply ironic. And Gantt was actually very attuned to respect for people and people using their brains. Taylor, in his writing, was not. So the pattern here is humanity and respect for people. And then the final character unlocked is Konosuke Matsushita. He was the founder of Panasonic. This is in the fourth industrial revolution. Claims to fame, he created one of the world's largest manufacturers of electric goods. He published 44 books, and I think he didn't start writing until he was 60. And his superpower, he was referred to as the god of management in Japan. So definitely an unsung hero in the West. And to quote Matsushita, interviewed in 1982 at the age of 88, he said, "Your firms in the industrial West are built on the Taylor model. Even worse, so are your heads. With your bosses doing the thinking while the workers wield the screwdrivers, you're convinced deep down that is the right way to run a business. For the essence of management is getting ideas out of the heads of the bosses and into the heads of labor. We are beyond your mindset. Business is now so complex and difficult that the continued existence of firms depends on the day-to-day mobilization of every ounce of intelligence." So there on the left, he is referring to the Taylor model explicitly around bosses doing the thinking. And on the right, he is absolutely aware of the value and the importance of everybody bringing their brain to work and everybody using their heads. So the pattern here, again, is respect for people. Today, in order to nurture humane ways of working, it's good to have long-lived multidisciplinary teams, value stream aligned teams in the context of change. It is good to have high alignment. OKRs are a good way to have high alignment across your different role-based specialities in your multidisciplinary team, and that enables high autonomy. A focus on outcomes over output helps to nurture humane ways of working. These are the outcomes we're going after. Now, team or teams, you go figure. Psychological safety, paramount. We need to be able to have intelligent failure. We need to be able to experiment. We need to be able to challenge people in authority, and people in authority need to be open to be challenged respectfully. And enabling leadership. How can I help? The role of a leader is not to be a dictatorial boss, but increasingly it is to be there to help the teams, to help remove impediments from out of the way of teams and help people to develop as individuals. And then finally, it is very helpful to have very clear leadership guiding principles with teeth. Most organizations that I talk to or work with, there are no leadership guiding principles. There is no intention about the behavior, or if they do exist, they are words on a piece of paper or on a website, and there is no feedback loop. So it's not rocket science. It's easy to talk about. It's relatively easy to do, which is be clear about the behaviors that you want in your organization and make sure there is a feedback loop. So to recap, the top 3 learnings from the past that we could all benefit from having more of in our organizations today Number one, a data feedback loop. We need to measure the system of work. For example, better, value, sooner, safer, happier. We need to measure the how as well as the what. Number two, incentivize continuous improvement. And number three is humanity, respect for people. So if we have a very clear set of outcomes we're going after, if we have a data feedback loop, if we incentivize continuous improvement, and if we are clear about the behaviors that we want in the company, in line with respect for people, with high alignment and high autonomy and psychological safety, with those in place, you can't help but improve. Here are the outcomes. Here's the data feedback loop. Pursue continuous improvement with a focus on flow and a focus on humanity. You cannot help but to improve. So to wrap up, here is an almost feasible dinner party from the past. Given I realized that actually all of these people, they would have known each other, I was thinking, oh my God, like what an amazing dinner party this would be. So here's my ideal dinner party from the past. So here we have Gant saying, whatever you do, don't use my chart to apply a deterministic mindset to an emergent, unknowable work and in an autocratic manner. Here we have Andrew Carnegie saying, continuously improve. By the way, here's some money, go and build a library. Here we have Lillian Gilbreth. Lillian and Frank Gilbreth focused on motion studies. She's saying, let's see who can eat with the fewest motions. Then we have Professor Robert Thurston saying, I want data for starter, data for main, and data for dessert with a side of data. And then we have Daniel McCallum saying, furnish me with a fund of information so that we can remedy our impediments. And that's a direct quote. And then there's me saying, OMG, lol. At which point they all look at me and wonder, what on earth is he saying? I've got no idea what OMG, lol means. So thank you very much.